I feel like I should apologize to the whole world because I didn't think it was going to lead to all this. I didn't think it was going to be that bad. I thought reading Empress Theresa was just going to lead to another dumb book review. I didn't think I was going to cause all of this chaos. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure that I opened up some sort of a dimensional rift or enacted some ancient misbegotten curse by reading Theresa and then reviewing it and getting it out to the world the way that I have. Because I'm pretty sure that I have unlocked a biblical plague by doing this. And unfortunately, the longer this review has gone on, the worse the condition has gotten. So I'm just going to finish this off, and hopefully that'll subside the virus. It'll sate whatever ancient deity I've pissed off, and we can all go back to our lives. The global pestilence wasn't caused by any kind of authoritarian communist government that murdered witnesses and tried to cover everything up and now is doing everything in its power to silence critics and shift the blame. It was me tripping on some sort of an ancient blood ritual that I didn't understand. So, to the entire world, please accept my formal apology when I say, my bad. Also, sorry that my hair is like this. I've got a shit ton to go over today, and I've got to start early. I couldn't wait for my hair to dry. Alright, so, Empress Theresa, page 307, chapter 20. I'll just go over a few choice points in the chapter. There are a few good lines that I think should be highlighted. Like this one. There's some side plot that goes absolutely nowhere where Theresa has to meet with a negotiator from Saudi Arabia, and she's complaining about it to Prime Minister Blair. And because he said so many disparaging things about the Middle East in general, Norman took this opportunity to try to separate Saudi Arabia from the rest of the Middle East. And so he says this: "Indeed, there have been terrorist bombings inside Saudi Arabia itself. However, most Arabs would not want to see the end of terrorist organizations. They are jealous of Western society and wealth, and are amused to see the terrorists slap us in the face once in a while."
I hope you can see this because I'm doing it as hard as I can.
Now, skipping ahead a little bit to where Teresa's talking with the Saudi Arabian negotiator. Actually, I'm going to make a quick correction. The Saudi Arabian negotiators, they are on behalf of OPEC because Saudi Arabia is an ally to the United States and therefore would have been seen as a more friendly face to Theresa. At the same time, they have someone from Switzerland, who I don't think actually gets a name, who's acting as a mediator in this meeting. And this is all overly complicated. I don't know why they're even going forward with all of this crap. It is an attempt to silence OPEC because ruining them financially was not enough, apparently. So despite openly supporting terrorism, despite the threats that OPEC has put on Theresa, despite Theresa's past behavior with anyone who has shown her the slightest hint of aggression, she decides to very generously reform the Middle East. She starts the meeting by handing out a couple of printouts of the desert of Libya, the desert of Egypt, the desert of Iraq, the desert of Iran. Your countries are all desert because the land is flat. You don't have mountains to make the air rise up and cool off. The air stays hot enough to evaporate rain before it hits the ground. And with that being said, Norman, I would like to introduce you to the American Midwest, which is pretty flat. Afghanistan has quite a lot of mountains. Iran, I actually had to look this up to confirm, but Iran has a number of mountains that are over 10,000 feet. Your claim is bullshit. But Theresa offers to convert these deserts and turn them into France. She points out French Alps, the Swiss mountains, the Austrian mountains, and mountains are the key to having any kind of greenery, I suppose. Theresa also delivers a diamond ball made out of compressed carbon from the sun, which is 82 miles wide. And apparently what she does is she shatters it into millions and billions of pieces and spreads it all throughout the atmosphere, where I guess it just hangs in stasis. And this is to go with her promise for helping the citizens of Israel escape. In 95 minutes, the ball and stream complex came around the corner of the world again, this time giving off much more light. Everybody saw what I was doing. I was eliminating the darkness of night.
They want light. By God, they'll get light.
Now, Theresa attempts to defend this decision by claiming this. Crime would go down as criminals lost the cover of darkness. Yeah, because crime is never committed in the daytime. That is just a statistical fact.
Take that, crime, you shit!
Everybody was joyful at the prospect having 24-hour daylight. Yeah, except for people who like to stargaze, have romantic walks in the evening, people who are light sensitive and need darkness to help sleep, astronomers, astrophysicists, Batman. Oil Island is a success, and they are unloading millions of gallons of oil. And then, because we have to have a cliffhanger, one of the ships sinks. And it's not like an accident or anything. It was attacked by a different boat.
Terrorism.
As the Exxon Maria approached Jersey shores, a 55-foot sports fisherman's power boat headed straight for the tanker's side at high speed. The boat hit the tanker with a titanic explosion. The flash momentarily hid half the tanker's length. Flaming oil poured out of a 60-foot wide hole in the tanker's side. Burning oil spread out over the water. The heat was so intense, other pleasure boats in the vicinity had to back off half a mile. A black cloud of smoke obscured much of the disastrous scene, but flames could be seen. In only 19 minutes, the giant tanker sank out of sight.
I'm done.
What?
I'm done fighting you. I'm bored. You're boring me.
Chapter 21. So losing the oil tanker was very upsetting for Theresa, and she goes and isolates herself in a room once more, where she is met by Mrs. Parker, who actually does have a second contribution to the story, and it's exactly the same as the first, and it makes about as much sense. A few minutes later, Mrs. Parker knocked on the bedroom door and I let her in. She gave me a hug. "You poor dear. You share the lot of all women. You worry about those we are responsible for. We hope the world will treat them well. We send our sons to war and pray they come back. We see our daughters marry strangers. Our lot is to worry until death."
What the fuck does that mean?
And despite not saying anything that really sums up the situation, not saying anything that really solves the situation, and despite Theresa not even contributing any dialogue, that single paragraph was enough to get Theresa to calm down, come back downstairs, and devise a plan to take on OPEC. And her plan comes back to economic warfare, where she's going to be selling oil at $10 a barrel. The Israelis finally start their exodus in earnest, and Prime Minister Ben gives this really blasé and at the same time culturally insensitive speech to try to inspire them. "My friends, we had a long journey and many hardships, but finally we go to the promised land. Theresa has given us a new paradise, free from the menaces of this world. Our children will know no other Israel but the new island, because Israel is where the Israeli people are."
Amazing. Every word of what you just said was wrong.
Okay, so going line by line there, I don't know what this long journey and many hardships are supposed to be. I think the hardships refer to the terrorist attacks that Israel's been struck by. I'm not sure what he means by long journey, like as a broad concept maybe. The promised land, that one's horse shit, because they're already there. I mean, which would you rather have? The land promised to you by a psychotic, irresponsible despot, or an actual god? Even though New Israel will be further away from the Middle East, that's not going to do anything to stop anti-Semitism. So That's not going away anytime soon. And Israel being where the Israeli people are, I feel like I actually have to point out that Israel does not function the same way as Asgard.
Asgard is not a place. Never was. This could be Asgard.
Oh, and I want to point out this particular line. Teresa's giving some exposition about how America is going to help the Israeli people resettle temporarily before new Israel is ready or properly settled. People rushed to schools and churches to sign lists volunteering to take in a Jewish family. Millions of Americans had a summer cabin somewhere, or a mobile home, or an empty apartment, and everybody had a garage that could be converted into a bedroom. I don't have a summer cabin. Where's my summer cabin? Norman's tone deaf to everybody. Hi. How you doing? What? Through this entire thing, Teresa is propping herself up. I'm going to stop saying, oh, well, this person just praised Teresa. Just assume that every time she does anything, someone praises her and says, oh my God, Teresa's amazing. But she goes on and gives this little false humility speech. She writes a letter for Blair to be read in the House of Commons. Dear Mr. Blair, people say I should be given the Nobel Peace Prize for the Israel situation. It should be given to Prime Minister Scherzer. He's heroic. Anybody would have told him to stay in Israel and prepare for the fight. So what did he do?
Post out like a bitch.
He came to London to see a girl who had no ties to Judaism, who couldn't find Israel on a map, who had no interest in politics or war, who might not be able to do anything at all about Israel, who might not even care what happened to Israel. Aren't politicians supposed to take care of those things? He threw all his chips in the pot and came away a royal straight flush. Your friend Teresa. The sheer audacity of Norman to make Teresa behave like a 7-year-old all the time and proclaim that she's some brilliant masterpiece character. One, the whole thing just screams false humility. Two, why would she write to Blair about anything regarding the Nobel Peace Prize? 3, why would she start it off that way? Why would she start the letter off that way? Oh, people say that I should get the Nobel Peace Prize. That just screams of narcissism. 4, her endorsement of Prime Minister Ben is laughable at best. Anyone would have told him to stay in Israel and prepare for the fight. So instead, he fled, he retreated, he ran away.
Colonel Manson, I want you to tell your men to run away.
What?
Those words, run away. I want you to be famous for those exact words.
So we continue with the chapter. Teresa's 19th birthday is coming up on May 8th, and it's been almost a full year since they were taken in by the Parkers. And I guess Steve is tired of bumming on their couch, so they decide to return to America. The question is how? Now, the first suggestion that President Stinson suggests is them coming home on the USS Ronald Reagan. Now, that is the same ship that the atom bomb-laden jet launched from. The ship has been a leper colony since last year. Nobody wants to serve on her. Your presence will restore the crew's pride. I am honestly curious how little of a fuck any actual sailor would give about this situation. Anyone watching this who did serve, please comment below and let me know if Teresa, her assassination was ordered from your ship with this plan. Would you care about taking part even tangentially in this stupid plot? And would your pride be restored if she were to sail across the Atlantic one time with you, effectively using your carrier as a personal ferry? Well, Teresa declines the offer because she's not sure what Hal would do, since bad memories of being on the boat and all. So she does offer to assist the crew with their wounded pride. However, it's not the way you would expect. You see, they're going to play a football game. Teresa's apparently going back to West Point, and when they get there, she suggests that they send the crew to West Point on the 4th of July, where they will participate in a football game. and she'll play the quarterback. You remember she's got super strength, so that doesn't sound fair. She'd be able to walk in every single touchdown. No one could knock her over. She'll be quarterback. We'll make it an Army-Navy game. To make it fair, neither side can use regular academy football players. The Ronald Reagan crew will be amateurs. The Army has to use amateurs too. The ambassador loved it. What an exciting idea! It will be bigger than the Super Bowl! It will drive the odds makers nuts.
It's driving me nuts.
So for anyone outside of America who's not familiar with our football traditions, we do have the annual Super Bowl, and that's its own gigantic thing. But we also have the annual Army-Navy game, which is where you take the college-level teams from West Point and Annapolis Naval Academy. They compete, and Navy wins. So what Theresa's suggesting is basically a watered-down kindergarten version of one of America's most notable traditions in sports. So rather than go home and visit her parents, which at this point I'm convinced she's avoiding for some reason, the Parker estate is turned into a football training field. And Theresa is taught how to be a proper quarterback. Yes, this is real. And because Norman always has to go the extra mile with how tasteless some of this bullshit is, Norman gives a scene, and this is all because of the use of a single word that he should not have used, but we get a scene which is both a statement against servicemen and against women. There were a couple of the sailors who unnecessarily groped at me. This had been expected, of course. I told their leader about it, and he sent them home. I'm pretty sure that he meant she was being ogled or leered, or the men were just staring, and okay, fine, whatever. Groping is different. Groping is very different. And I don't even know how to explain that one. Honestly, it's fucking stupid. And because Norman cannot stay on topic for more than a couple of pages, we get another tangent. We get a scene where they're celebrating the anniversary of her world-breaking 11-mile drop without a parachute. So some dumbass decides to do exactly that and tries to break the record. And so because this dumbass stuntman has not been injected with an alien goo baby, he dies. Shocker, I know! And people start analyzing, oh my god, how did this happen? How did he die? What could he have done differently? Not jump? It's 11 miles in the air. He was so high he needed an oxygen tank to fucking breathe. And then the scene's over. And Theresa just treats the whole thing as like, yep, okay, well, I'm washing my hands. I didn't say not to do it or to do it. I take no sides in this. Oh my god, this is so dumb. They also put him in a jet without a canopy because to make it easier for the stuntman to jump out. Like,
That's stupid. You're stupid.
ejector seats are a thing? You could have done that. Or, there is that stunt of, I forget what his name actually is, and I don't care enough to look it up, but Red Bull sponsored that guy who jumped out of that pod. So, they could have done that. So after the scene is done, after everyone's washed their hands of this dead stuntman is idiotic plot, Theresa goes on to this completely unrelated tangent about how Mr. Parker was a pretty smart guy. Mr. Parker was a pretty smart guy. After a year in England, I developed an appreciation of English conservatism. They kept many old ways and institutions. Consider the royal family and all the rituals that go with it. What's that about? I asked Mr. Parker about that. He talked about prejudice and defined 200 years ago. So I'm just going to leave it on screen if anyone cares enough to actually read it. Short version, it's praising English conservatism and goes on about, how traditions are important and how Pride and Prejudice is good, something of the wisdom of the species. And then she caps the whole thing off with, a fool like Derek Eames, the stuntman, wouldn't understand a word of this. What is going on? Did she go on this entire tangent just to mock a dead man? Norman, take your Ritalin! Chapter 22. So it's finally time for Theresa and Steve to leave the Parker estate, where they say goodbye to Mr. Parker, Mrs. Parker, and their children. Oh, did you forget that they had children? Because so did I! Next was the 17-year-old son John, and 13-year-old Stephanie, who could barely keep her eyes dry, and 11-year-old Jennifer, who was crying like she was losing everything she valued. Yes, because they were such riveting, involved characters. The children, I don't even know why the kids are here, just like to artificially make the Parkers look like a family. As characters, the children's only function is to be introduced. Outside of that, they have no purpose. I walked away quickly. The Parkers and Arthur were left in mournful silence. Empress Theresa, the humble my ass, the humble world saver and conqueror, the right hand of God, was no longer in their lives. I think that would be kind of a relief, because what if you had like a super powerful deity just hanging out in your living room? Like, imagine if you actually had the God Emperor from Warhammer 40k just hanging out with you. I would kind of hope that he would be like satisfied and leave, so I wouldn't worry about accidentally pissing him off and dooming the planet. Oh, go. So this, I pretty much get to skip this entire chapter because there's this needless tension as they are on a plane flying over the Atlantic when all of a sudden everyone just passes out for some reason. Everyone except for Theresa. Like 20 pages of worthlessness. Now, I say that that's useless because it's useless. Nothing of consequence happens. It's another in a very lengthy series of misadventures that Theresa just bumps into. The reason everyone passed out is because Hal freaked out and had a reaction of, being over the Atlantic again, because that's where they were when Theresa had that mighty fall, even though I don't know why he would have that reaction. He was reacting to the wind beforehand, and that's why he canceled out the wind. But they're inside a plane where there is no wind. Why is he reacting like this? He's been on a plane before. You remember the trip from Paris to Dublin, then Dublin to London? That was done by plane. Hal is really, really stupid. I'm not even sure he understands the concept of the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, it's just a different spot on the planet to him. But anyway, Hal nearly murders everyone on the plane. Theresa has to dramatically take over and pilots the plane back to somewhere in New York. And all the while, the whole planet is watching on and inspired by how well Theresa handled this thing, even though at one point she actually disregards suggestions from the control tower despite not knowing how to fly a fucking plane. They actually suggested that she landed in the water. Like, I think they wanted her to land in the Hudson. So we're replicating the Miracle on the Hudson that Catherine Sullenberger managed to succeed with. But no, Theresa's a super good girl. So she's able to land on the runway of, I can't even find which airport it was. Some airport. They land at some airport, and it's perfect. She doesn't even wobble side to side. It is a perfect 3-point landing. And then they go off to West Point. You can cut this entire chapter, and the only thing that happens is Theresa goes from point A to point B. The misadventure in between has no impact on consequence. It does not affect her relationship with Steve. It doesn't affect her standing in the world in any way. It just happened. It's filler. So Theresa goes to West Point. Not to visit, not to do that stupid football game thing we'll get to in a moment, but because that's where they built her new house. Chapter 23. A 3-bedroom ranch-style house had been built for us on West Point, less than a mile from headquarters. Now, as I've said before, I have not served, so I don't actually have the wherewithal to properly call bullshit on this. But I still feel pretty safe calling bullshit on this. And we run into the parents again. Theresa's parents meet them at this new place. And we get an interesting revelation that has not been hinted at or suggested or mentioned or anything. Mom! We met and hugged. There were the typical comments of missing each other and how are you. I observed that Mom appeared to be mentally sharp. She was recovered from whatever problem she had a year ago. I should also point out that Theresa chose this spot to get her new house built instead of like one of the undeveloped areas on West Point property because she preferred to see some kind of cadet activity from the window. Now, I don't know if she's bored and doesn't like television, or if she just wants something to ogle at. Makes me think there might be some marital troubles there. Maybe Steve's not performing his husbandly duties too well. Got more media hate. So Theresa spends a few pages building up this football game, and amendment from earlier, she's actually playing alongside Navy. It was the rednecks versus the cream of society. The underdogs versus the elite. The army are the underdogs in this, just so we're clear. And Theresa being the quarterback means that this is going to be an absolute sweep. The super strength combined with the aimbot means that every other play should be like a Hail Mary. You just have a row of linebackers defending her. You send 2 or 3 runners downfield where, you know, they scatter and become hard to defend, and she aims however the hell she wants to, and there you go. Instant win button. It's like first football game where you win 1,000 points. Well, surprise, surprise, I can actually read you the entire football game in a reasonable span of time. Here it is. Army won 48-36. Oh well, at least people could see the game wasn't rigged to let me win. She spent so much time building that up, hyping this up as this crucial moment for the crew of the Ronald Reagan. And it means jack shit. I'm not even gonna go on about how Army won. I'm sure plenty of people in the comments are gonna go nuts about that. What surprises me is there was this moment for Theresa to be the super awesome good girl, and she doesn't take it. Like, she actually loses. It's inconsequential, and it means nothing a paragraph later, so it's not a real loss. It's not like Peter Parker's choices resulting in Uncle Ben dying. You know, that's real loss. What I think happened is Norman was writing this scene, and then he got bored about halfway through and just wrote it off as nothing. We don't get any particular plays, we don't get any special moments from the game. It was just, oh, Army won. Okay, next thing. And speaking of next thing, there's the problem of Theresa's finances and how she has too much of it. 5 more executives came in. Jan explained, "You have so much money, you can't put more than a small amount of it in the stock market without driving stock prices crazy. There's an alternative. Buy out entire companies." What companies? Boeing Aircraft, Ford Motor, General Electric, US Steel, and Nucor Steel. The book actually tries to explain that it would be a good idea for all these companies to combine into a single thing underneath Theresa's leadership. Theresa declines the offer because it's a really stupid idea. Nothing becomes of that, so what was the fucking point? New rule, take a shot every time a scene can be summed up as pointless filler. Oh god. So, Theresa decides to start touring New York and goes around doing whatever the hell she wants, when all of a sudden she starts getting followed by crying Asian men. Yeah. Just outside our front door was an unusual group of people. They were 10 Asian men who looked to be in their 20s, although it was hard to tell. When they saw me, they immediately started crying and lamenting. They held pictures of me, put their hands out, and begged for something. I couldn't tell what they wanted. They spoke in some Asiatic language. And this happens like 2 more times. They keep running into these random crying Asians until like the 3rd time, where they're joined by an 11th Asian man who is apparently South Korean, who explains that the group are from North Korea, and they escaped, and they're begging for help. The quiet Asian man was motioned to come over. He said, "Please, Miss Theresa, see this tape and you will know how they suffer." He handed me a videotape. I'll look at it. We went upstairs to put the tape in a VCR. It was a documentary for a PBS channel. And then the tape itself goes on to explain, you know, how North Koreans are badly abused by the government and how North Korea is an incredibly shitty place. You know, common knowledge, especially because Theresa has first-hand experience with North Korea being bad since they shot a missile at her water spouts. Remember that? But of all of this, the thing that really impresses me is the use of a videotape and a VCR. Now, I can excuse the North Koreans having a VHS. What I am impressed by is that Theresa has a VHS player in 2016. She just pops upstairs and puts it in a VCR like it's nothing. She doesn't go and get it converted. She doesn't have a conversion player. She doesn't go and get it digitized. She just has a VHS player in this day and age because shut up. Well, Theresa is so moved by the plight of the North Koreans that she decided to intervene. So she's going to work with South Korea and the United States to take North Korea down, because nothing's happened in the last couple of pages, so something's got to happen. Now, it was around this time that I started playing around with the idea that maybe Theresa is supposed to be an unreliable narrator. Now, an unreliable narrator, broadly speaking, is a narrator who tells a story with a certain lack of credibility. And there are multiple different ways you can do that. One way could be that they just don't have the wherewithal to really understand what they're doing or the impact they have on others, kind of like Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump didn't really understand what he was doing in many scenarios, didn't have a firm grasp on reality, but had a monumental impact on the culture, the people around him, and that was shown very well through his narration. It was also backed up with cultural references that anyone familiar with those decades would understand. So you're kind of getting two stories in one. You're getting the story that Forrest told himself and was trying to tell the audience, and then you got the story the movie was telling. And I tried to give Norman the benefit of the doubt, thinking maybe Theresa's unaware of how awful she really is. Maybe she's supposed to be blissfully unaware of how insanely dangerous she is, where she doesn't fully comprehend her actions. And I dismissed that idea pretty quickly because it's pretty obvious that Norman does not have the skill to pull off a story that complicated when you consider how many typos there are in this book, how many tangential plot threads that go nowhere, and the fact that this far into the book, just to remind you, the North Pole is still exploding. Theresa has to meet with President Stinson about the plan to take down North Korea. Her plan is a simple one. I'm going to get Hal to destroy every weapon in North Korea. Once all the weapons are destroyed, the South Korean army can move in without resistance and take over the country. But that idea gets shot down by the president because apparently that would create mobs within the country, and when the mobs take over their countries, they slaughter everyone perceived as oppressors. North Korea has 2 million people with government jobs from the top leader to the lowest city worker. They'll all be killed. The atrocities will make Nazi concentration camps look like vacation resorts. First off, I doubt that very much, simply from a number perspective, because it's not the same. Second, how? With what tools? With what weapons? The weapons will be gone, so are we talking about people getting stoned to death in mass? Third, are you defending North Korea? So Theresa tweaks the idea and only destroys weapons within a particular corridor, so the South Korean army can march into North Korea unopposed. And Theresa will march with them all the way to Pyongyang, the capital, where she will take over the country herself.
We trade one villain for another.
But it's not just weapons. You've got to understand there are also planes and tanks and atom bombs that you've got to consider. So Theresa over-explains how Hal goes through the country and destroys every one of those in turn. So you got a passage for destroying the firearms, a passage for destroying the planes, a passage for destroying the tanks, and oh my god, I am bored. The way that he works though is Hal goes in and detects things based on how they're shaped. So if North Korea, a very secluded, secretive country, had designed a type of weapon that Theresa does not know about, or a particular shape of a weapon that Theresa does not know about, then it's still in effective use. Basic handgun, for example, if you tweak it just a little bit, or you bring in a type of handgun that Hal's not familiar with or isn't looking for, that's still in effect. This is a really stupid plan. Handguns aren't simply, shaped like this and they make the pew-pew go that way. You gotta consider barrel length, magazine size, calibers. You probably have to consider attachments. But no, because Theresa is perfect, then the whole thing just works. The other part of the problem is what to do when Theresa's actually in power, because as she points out, North Korea already has a very particular bureaucracy and dictatorship in place. And if she were to jump in there and instantly change whatever she wanted to, however she wanted to, it wouldn't go over very well. Certain things can't be instantly changed. You can't go snap your fingers and instantly change an economy overnight, as an example. So her decision doesn't sound good. The North Koreans themselves would have to remain in their jobs as before. This would be politically unacceptable to the South Korean citizens. No politician would dare suggest it. Therefore, I would have to run the country dictatorially through the North Korean bureaucracy for a while. But because this would be a military matter and because Theresa would be acting on behalf of the United States government, they decided to take the safe route, and make her an officer in the United States Army. So she swears an oath of office, a commissioned officer's oath, in the mansion of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Walters. And this leads us to page 388, which is significant because it is the second of only 2 pages that don't have anything worth remarking on how bad they are. Second page with no tabs. Second of 2. Chapter 25. We're almost done with this. So Theresa has to get a military outfit because she has to go and meet with the president and needs to look official because now she's a sworn officer. There was another thing I wanted. I wanted a male uniform, not a female outfit. I wanted the authoritative aura of a male. And she claims that this is okay because there was precedent for deviating from uniform regulations, and cites General Patton wearing his revolver and Douglas MacArthur, who wore a 1920s raccoon coat over his uniform when he was the garrison commander at West Point, apparently. Here's the thing though, for someone who wanted the authoritative aura of a male, she does nothing to try to respect the uniform. There was one more thing. A woman was supposed to wear long hair up while in uniform. I didn't. I assumed nobody would say anything.
Oh, I can't wait for this little Karen in training to tell me all about the military.
Now, uniform regulations are not very popular, but they are important. If you look like a slob, if you are out of dress, if you don't tuck in your shirt, or you don't polish your shoes, or any other number of things, you look like you're not taking your rank, your role, your position of leadership seriously. Theresa, and by extension Norman, does not understand this and goes along. It's like, no one even says, excuse me, I know you can crush me like a bug without it even trying, but do you think maybe you could put your hair up and look at least slightly presentable? I can only assume that this ties back to Norman's unconscious bias of women with long, luscious hair. He is so attached to that look that he will keep that in the story even if it makes absolutely no sense. Oh, and there's one more thing. Steve thought I looked awful cute in my little uniform. Hun, you never looked better. It turns me on. More than the first time you walked into my college room? not that much. Thank you, Norman, for this book that is completely devoid of all sexual situations. And anyone in the military watching who is pissed off by that scene, it gets worse. Theresa meets the president, a man named General Walters, and a representative of the South Korean army in the Oval Office. And President Stinson makes a proclamation. As you all know, Theresa will lead the South Koreans into the North to liberate that long-suffering people. Sensitivity to the feelings of all involved make it necessary that Theresa have the top military rank so her authority will be unquestioned. By act of Congress, Second Lieutenant Theresa Hartley is promoted to General of the Army. The reporters cheered and applauded as... I thought the reporters were bad guys. The reporters cheered and applauded as General Walters replaced the second lieutenant gold bars on my shoulder epaulets with circles of 5 stars. I was the first 5-star general since the death of Omar Bradley. This is so pompous. Now, for anyone who's not familiar with military ranks, and I admit I'm not an expert myself, but it's not just that someone is a general. There are actually certain ranks of generals, typically indicated by stars. So 2-star, 3-star, 4-star generals, and very rarely you'll have 5-star generals. I believe we have had 8 in this country's history. To just hand a 5-star general rank to a 19-year-old with no military experience, barely any life experience, for a hackneyed and honestly unnecessary reason, spits on the accomplishments of everyone else who have achieved the 5-star general rank. Theresa is made General of the Army despite her age, lack of experience, lack of merit, and having been sworn in as a second lieutenant earlier that morning. She's also wearing service medals and armed service medals just for being in the Army. I don't know how accurate that is, so I'm sure someone else can fill that in. We got more reporters actually applauding her, so are the reporters for her or against her? Keep switching back and forth. The occasion is so momentous that President Stinson gives a gushing speech about how great Theresa is and how people can never tell what she's going to do next. To which Theresa responds via an inner monologue about how anyone else on the planet would have taken this chance to talk about themselves, but not Theresa. No, she's far too humble than everybody else. She's not completely self-absorbed, which is why we've had almost 400 pages of her talking about how great she was despite the massive fuck-ups. She does eventually relent and gives a short speech. This may sound a bit familiar. I'm very simple. I follow my conscience. I am what I do. If you think that's easy, try it for one day. We are saved or damned, not for what we think, but for what we do. If kids understood that they are what they do, and they can change their identity today, there would be no street gangs and teenage prisoners. People's personalities collapse if they have nothing good to do. What is a man that you are mindful of him, and a son of man that you care for him? Yet you have made him little less than a god.
What the fuck does that mean?
And of course, everyone goes nuts about how great that is. The New York Times said my tiny speech would be carved on my tombstone. And because Theresa is Theresa, this eventually leads to talking about how great the Bible is. I was amazed at how this simple idea about being what you do is so completely ignored. It's implicit in everyday speech and human interaction, but nobody explicitly says the idea. Nearly every page of the Bible tells us what we should do, yet the Bible itself never explicitly states the idea the 10 Commandments are a thing. That also ignores that the Bible on multiple occasions says, if you do this, you will go to hell. Also, fun fact, did you know the Bible has like 27 different verses about poop? If people hadn't figured me out by now, they never would. It's because you never explain yourself. I've read this whole book and I can sum you up in a single paragraph. Religious narcissist ingests God sauce, becomes despot. Theresa begins her plan to march on North Korea, and she meets with a 2-star South Korean general named Sunwoo. And one day after getting this started, she's met with some bad news. General Sunwoo meets with her for breakfast and states, I have bad news. The North Korean leaders have ordered the people of Pyongyang to attack us when we enter the city. With what? Pointed sticks? She destroyed all the weapons.
He's got a board with a nail in it.
So they're worried that with all of the active duty soldiers in North Korea getting called back to defend Pyongyang and all the civilians being drafted, I guess, they're going to be facing a force of about 5 million people. We will be outnumbered 100 to 1. I believe we will be defeated. You'll be going against unarmed civilians, many of whom have no military training, and at the risk of sounding cruel, I recommend you look up the Battle of Agincourt. Numbers alone do not define a battle. Also, technological advantages really make the difference. You're talking a force of 500,000 soldiers not being able to take a badly coordinated mass of what are basically human shields, armed with pointy sticks and rocks. But despite overseeing one of the most easily led military victories in history, Theresa sees this as a bad thing and goes back to her room to sulk. I wished Steve was here. I wished I was back home with him. I wished Hal had invaded someone else. He had brought me nothing but problems and anxieties. You are one of the richest people who ever could exist. The magnitude of personal gain you have used these powers for is so enormous that you collapse the real estate market of whatever suburbs you walk through. She continues to sulk until she actually gets a call from Prime Minister Ben, of all people, who basically just says, hey, thanks for helping us before. And that's all she needed to hear, because now she's got a great new idea of how to access Pyongyang. And she only has to destroy several economies to do it. She looks at a map and studies the Korean Strait and the Sea of Japan and notices that there are some geographical conveniences. Between South Korea and Japan were two islands, Jeju on the left and Tsushima on the right. Jeju could be, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, I'm sorry if I'm not. Jeju could be moved straight down, but Tsushima was in the way. If I moved Tsushima just 50 miles to the east to rest next to the Japan mainland, I could move the entire Korean peninsula 70 miles south. Yeah, Tsushima is largely a fishing exporting island. If you do that, you will destroy their economy. That's like 80% of what they do. And again, this is just basically the same thing that she's done before with her powers. Some big miracle needs to happen, so she just fucks with plate tectonics. The big creative use of her powers comes down to move really big thing. The generals looked at me with a variety of expressions. Some looked sympathetic, some annoyed. All looked like they were thinking I was an amateur general who didn't know what she was doing. Gee, I wonder why! So eventually she moves these islands. Of course, she doesn't tell anyone about it, so God knows what the people on the islands are thinking. It must have been terrifying to see their island moving like that, but... And eventually Korea is moved 70 miles to the south. And I skipped like 10 pages to explain that. There's some problem about like flooding in some area that's below sea level, but I don't care, and it doesn't lead to anything anyway, so why go over it? So the plan was that this incredible display of strength was supposed to get the North Koreans gathering in Pyongyang to come to their senses and side with Theresa. That's really the bulk of it. I guess the idea is that the citizens were so insulated that they didn't really know who Theresa was or what she could do, which, okay, I'll buy that. But how does she prove that she was the one who did it? I mean, like, to the citizens, they're all, a good chunk of them are brainwashed. Theresa decides to go into Pyongyang regardless of any inherent danger or risk to the civilians. She gives this line: I wouldn't need makeup. It's hard to look beautiful when you're staring down millions of people who are ordered to kill you. So Theresa goes to Pyongyang and gives a speech. Fortunately, it looks like the North Korean leadership had fled the area and the army didn't have any weapons to throw down, but they weren't resisting. And the civilians just sat around and listened while Theresa gave a speech. It's mostly about how great she is. I could be back home living in luxury, but here I am, alone with 4 million North Koreans. I'm risking my life to save theirs. That's humility. Now I simply stood staring at the crowd until the translation was over. I could be home enjoying freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and freedom from fear. Why am I here? I guess I want everyone to have freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and freedom from fear. Theresa tries to appeal to North Korean masses by talking about how she wants freedom of speech, press, etc. for everybody. Something like that won't translate well for a brainwashed crowd like this who are taught to think that America is evil. It won't be effective against most people now, not just because of how lazy an attempt it is, because most people don't understand the full consequences of not having freedom of speech, press, etc. This argument could only work inside Theresa's head because despite how well-traveled she is, she does not understand other people at all. She can't empathize with them, so the only reason she can get anything done in a leadership role is because Norman makes everything easy on her. And she continues. When Steve and I went to a Paris restaurant, we were ignored because we weren't sophisticated. No, you were ignored because you didn't meet the dress code. I may not be as sophisticated as Parisians, but I don't see 4 million dead bodies around here.
Do you even listen to yourself when you talk?
I drift in and out.
Don't you get it? You're free. You have a new life. While Theresa assumes that the newly freed North Korean civilians will immediately appreciate and adjust to their newfound sovereignty, she forgets that with their oppression came structure. Many people won't know what to do, where to go, or how to get there. This is like showing up to work, and everyone who outranks you never shows up to give you instructions. You're free to do what you want, but at the same time, you probably won't know what to do or how to make money in your company. She then gives a speech for the North Koreans, the newly freed North Koreans, from the leader's balcony, and her entire speech is just reading the Declaration of Independence verbatim. And don't get me wrong, the Declaration of Independence is one of the most important documents ever written in history. But Theresa plays up the sappiness like it's this unheard of revelation. It is the most beautiful poetry that anyone has ever heard. And the reactions just come off as so overplayed. I had given the translator the English text the day before, and she worked all night at it. When I finished speaking, she read what I'd said in Korean with all the emotions and nuances only a Korea could express. You know, with that typo in mind, Captain America's name takes on a whole new meaning. Witnesses said President Stinson cried when I gave the speech. Does the United States president in this world not know what the Declaration of Independence is? This event, broadcast to the whole world, was called my greatest achievement. Yeah, give it another chapter, that's gonna change real fast. Chapter 26. So in one of the only examples in the book of Norman actually using foreshadowing and using it properly, is Theresa learning about biology and atomic theory. She's using Hal to study atoms, like specifically biological atoms, for reasons that are not made clear yet. It's revealed in the last chapter. It's not used well, but technically, it is being used properly.
You are technically correct. The best kind of correct.
And when I say it's not being used well, I mean it's being used to foreshadow something that's going to happen in the last chapter, which is 2 chapters away. Theresa starts playing around with methyl blue, which is a stain agent used on molecules to help study them. Apparently, like, she makes jello with it, and that leads nowhere. We jump topics, and now we talk about how Hal is being used to discover lost archaeological wonders. We're not talking about uncovering the lost city of Ubar, which has been called the Atlantis of the Sands. If you want a good example for why that's awesome, read Sandstorm by James Rollins. No, we're talking scrolls and pottery and things like that. Things which are, you know, okay, that's kind of cool, but nothing really breathtaking or mind-blowing. Theresa actually opens up a small building in New York and invites Prime Minister Ben to come check out some of her discoveries. They're like ancient Hebrew texts. Like one of them is the ancient Hebrew copy of Leviticus and other such things. There's a potential wealth of information that could be gleaned from all this. And Theresa doesn't want to reveal where she found them.
But why?
Why would you do that? Why would you do any of that?
We never actually find out, but Prime Minister Ben doesn't seem to care. He actually thinks this is a great idea. You'll win the lottery in the tourist business. It was called the greatest archaeological find in history, outdoing the discovery of King Tut's tomb, which, while it provided interesting objects to look at, only provided a few pages of writing, all of it about Tut himself. The scrolls I found, if they contained new stories about the Hebrews, could inspire dozens of movies, hundreds of books, and thousands of paintings to look at. Could I ever top this? I'd give it a try. And try she does, because she finds something, and she invites... God, this is so stupid. She finds something in England, and there's a lot of build-up in the book to what it could be. There's a lot of speculation coming from the crowds. Oh, could it be King Arthur? Could it be William the Conqueror? It might narrow it down if I tell you that she invited the French president. The French president, anticipating an important event, had chosen 500 French people with tremendous enthusiasm and patriotism for France. And they all go in attendance, you know, to witness this whatever mystery thing it is. So there's some French guy named Monsieur Labert, who I guess is being used to authenticate whatever Theresa uncovers. And they find a box. And inside the box is a book with a wood binding and papers inside. Labert, true to his promise, left the announcement to me. After getting myself together, I reached into the box and pulled out a cloth bag about 10 inches long and 8 inches wide, presumably made of wool and tied with a string. I undid the string and pulled out a handful of perfectly preserved black hair. At this sight, Labert broke down and cried like a little girl. And are you ready for it to get stupid? Because it's about to get stupid. I carefully put the hair back in the bag, tied it off, and put the bag in the box to prevent somebody from stealing it. I lifted a skull and lower jawbone out of the box. All the teeth were present, and I easily fit the skull to the jawbone. I held the head high to let the crowd see and made the announcement. I present to the people of France, Saint Joan of Arc. This, of course, results in tremendous applause, as everything Theresa does results in tremendous applause. Norman handles it so awkwardly that I just have to point this out. There was total bedlam in the church. I couldn't keep track of what every person in a crowd of 500 was doing and can't describe the reactions. Use your imagination. In other words, he ran out of adjectives and just got bored. And of course, because it's Norman and because this entire book is a love letter to Joan of Arc, he goes on about how amazing she was. Joan was the greatest hero of France. She set up 600 years of history as we know it. Without Joan, there was no independent France, no European nations' interactions as we know them, no Christopher Columbus, no New World as we know it, and no United States of America. Something else would be on the North American continent, and probably not as good. There were thousands of saints, but did any of them change history like Joan? Forget it. Churchill said, Joan is a being so uplifted from the ordinary run of mankind that she finds no equal in 1,000 years. Mark Twain said, in the history of the human intellect, nothing approaches this. Joan of Arc stands alone. And keep in mind, I'm not trying to say that Joan of Arc wasn't impressive or accomplished and didn't do incredible things, but Norman, she's been dead for like 600 years. Put your dick away. There's more celebrating, there's more crying, there's more cheering. She even goes on to say that the English were sorry for killing Joan. And for her discovery, Theresa was given some of the hair that they've found. I promised to build a St. Joan of Arc cathedral somewhere in America to preserve my small hair sample forever. You know, I imagine every once in a while, Theresa just goes to see the exhibit, opens it up, and sniffs the hair. That was the end of my archaeology activity. I could never top finding Joan. I mean, you could find proof of aliens, like maybe they built the pyramids, or you could find Atlantis. That'd be pretty big. You could find King Arthur. Just saying. Oh yeah, because Theresa instituted a year-round daylight and summer schedule. Oh my god, this has got to be sweltering. I bet the entire planet smells like feet. Anyway, the Winter Olympics are canceled. So in order to actually get snow and skiing and all that, The International Olympic Committee approaches Theresa and requests another island. So she builds it, and it's awesome. She promises to make an island 25,000 feet high in the middle of Lake Michigan.
Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
And she does this with crushed rocks, so that's a thing. Oh, and for her to do all this, she needs to own 55% of the shares for all of the ski resorts that are built on this mountain. It should be pointed out that it's actually really difficult to breathe above like 20,000 feet. I don't remember what it is precisely, but after a while, the Winter Olympics are going to have to be held with everyone equipped with oxygen tanks. Like, the way that this island is set up, you're supposed to start at the top and ski down that way, and the games are going to be built around that concept. And these new winter games, they're going to be the best winter games. They're going to be better than the summer games. They're going to be so good, you're not going to believe how good they are. The poor summer game athletes would look around and say, hey, anybody watching us? No, they're all skiing. Oh, and Theresa, while she's at it, just plops like 60 or 70 of those giant ski resort mountains around the world. Everything that Theresa's doing economically, running all these businesses, yeah, she's got the gold sales to back everything up, but her businesses have got to be losing a lot of money. Like, selling oil at $10 a barrel means there's a lot of maintenance and upkeep and payrolls that you can't cover. There's a reason why you don't have Disney World in every single state. Oh yes, and I foreshadowed this before. So, you remember how I mentioned there was like a single terrorist who shows up in the book? Granted, I forgot about the one who suicide bombed the side of the oil tanker, but shows how impactful that was. Pretty sure Norman forgot about that as well once the chapter was done. I set out one morning, and it happened so fast I didn't see it coming. A fast-moving car hit me from the side. I flew over the car and landed on the street. The government security men were all over me. They were smart enough to let me lie there. So the guy was actually a Middle East terrorist. That's all we really get from that. And Theresa's injuries are severe. They're really serious. Steve comes to visit and gives her the bad news. When do I get out of here? It will be a while. Your back is broken. He stopped for a moment, delaying the worst as long as he could. The doctors say you won't walk again. The world's reaction was so heart-wrenching you would have thought that Michael Jackson died again. The world's reaction was touching enough to preserve my faith in humanity. People organized in hundreds of kinds of demonstrations. Large groups of children were assembled to sing pretty little songs to give me hope. Military bands and symphony orchestras gave special concerts in my honor. Air Force planes flew over my hospital daily. That must be really upsetting for the people trying to get some sleep.
Come back another day.
But you remember how Theresa was studying biology? Well, the president comes to visit Theresa while she's in the hospital, and Theresa points out that she's been studying biology and atomic theory. Theresa's really proud of this and demonstrates that she does not understand how bodies work. Imagine what a surgeon could do if he could operate on one cell at a time. Do you have any idea how many cells are in the human body? This notion is so dumb. Surgery. If you were to operate like that, surgery would take years, not the hours that Theresa seems to think that it would. And eventually Theresa leaves the hospital in a wheelchair. Chapter 27. Now, I'm taking a guess here because Theresa left the hospital in a wheelchair, and from what I can recall, Norman never refers to it again. So, between the insanity of the plot and all the writing mistakes, I think I just forgot about it. But anyway, the chapter starts off with a dramatic twist. 204 white spheres hovered miles over eastern Massachusetts, a little less than a yard wide each and swirling around several yards from each other. They weren't visible from the ground. Just to cut down on a lot of melodrama, yes, these are all separate versions of Hal. And these new Hals start jumping into people. Apparently these Hals split off from Theresa during the atom bomb incident, and I'm curious why they split off in the numbers they did, while one copy stayed with Theresa. Like, if nothing can really threaten Hal, then why is there even a need or a reflex for this division thing? This whole thing contradicts Hal's biology, as it was explained before. There's nothing that can really damage him, so there's no need for him to reproduce. And it's not like he has any kind of a shortened biological lifespan, so he doesn't need to continue on to a next generation or anything like that. And why 204? Why not like 2 or 3 copies? Probably because Norman thinks that it's just more dramatic that way, when really it's just more ridiculous. Also, there are supposed to be lots of other Hals wandering around the universe, so why couldn't it have been them? Why aren't they just like converging to go find this Hal because this Hal has been attached to a human for too long, or whatever reason? Theresa's big concern is that all these new people who have bonded with these new Hals might learn how to use their powers, and because they're not super good girls like Theresa, they might cause havoc. Steve answered, "We're in big trouble. It's only months before these people get control of their Hals. You and I know what ordinary people will do when they get unlimited power. They'll go nuts with it. They'll try to grab this and that, and anybody who stops them will be eliminated." So there's a lot of worrying. I'm skipping a lot of stuff here just to get this done. But there's a lot of worrying about how this happened, and like on 4 different occasions people reference the atom bomb going off causing the new Hals to form, which when you think about it doesn't make any sense, because Hal's not really a biological creature, so why split off at all? I mean, this is really functionally the same thing as, like, say you're a mother with a bunch of kids on a plane that's going down in flames. So you grab all the kids, you throw them out the door and say, "Aha! Now I'm safe," and you stay on the plane. So Theresa comes up with a plan to try to counter all the Hals, to reabsorb them, but she can't actually absorb them because, as the book puts it, when she tries to absorb another Hal from a volunteer who wants to give his up after he bonded with it, it looks like Theresa's Hal couldn't get into you. Your own Hal keeps him out. That makes sense. They can't occupy the same space. We've never been led to believe that Hal actually occupies physical space, so this makes no sense. If Hal does occupy physical space, then that means he has to exist somehow physically as a single entity within Theresa, or at the very least as a collection of entities working in unison as a hive mind. This is just another in a long unanswered series of questions about how Hal is supposed to work. Saying they can't occupy the same space, saying that Hal can't reabsorb this other Hal, is just a weak attempt to heighten the drama, especially when you consider that the real answer is a non-answer, that the solution is so dumb, but we'll get to that in a minute. It's like arguing that thoughts can't occupy the same space. This book is so dumb. So Theresa's answer to everything is to give herself more time to think. And when I say she gives herself more time to think, I mean she puts everyone on the planet into a coma. A tanker from Theresa's island was crossing the Indian Ocean some 900 miles east of South Africa. Its radio went silent. All attempts to hail the tanker resulted in silence. It is an alarming situation when nothing is known about what a giant oil tanker is doing. A plane was sent to investigate. As it approached the area in question, it too went silent. Yeah, there's like this wave of unconsciousness that's spreading across the planet, so that plane crew is dead. And of course, Theresa gives no notice to anybody, doesn't say, "Hey, don't panic, I'm doing a thing, you'll be all right." She just knocks everybody out. No statements, no FAQs, no announcement. It is so absurd. But anyway, almost done. Chapter 28, this is the last one. Despite Theresa not reaching out to any world leaders to explain what's going on, to explain herself, to give any kind of heads up, by the way, don't board any planes for a little while because your pilots will get knocked out. Rather than give anyone a chance to find safety, to get somewhere comfortable, it's up to the President of the United States to give everyone an assumed heads up. My fellow Americans, the last time Prime Minister Blair and I met with Theresa and Steve said something which I considered a statement of pessimism and hopelessness. He said it might take Theresa many years to find a way to control the other Hals, and we didn't have that much time. What Steve was really doing was giving us a hint of what Theresa was about to do. She is putting the world into deep sleep to arrest any activity of the other Hals and their hosts until she can find a way to control them. This is a reasonable course to take, and the only one that will rescue us from a political and social nightmare we can't even describe. People are dead. Oh, and if you think that was audacious, listen to this. What Theresa is doing is not without risk. Many things could go wrong, but she hasn't failed yet. I can't believe a god who has brought her this far without mistakes will let her make one now. I would list her mistakes and the cataclysmic litany of failure that is her everything in this book, but that would take too long. Oh, and by the way, this entire section is told from Theresa's perspective, describing somebody else's perspective. So, yeah. So as soon as the president's speech is done, she passes out, immediately wakes up, and some Secret Service men start explaining things that have been happening in the world. The president meets with the chairman of her Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he explains, people have been waking up one by one in random order for 3 weeks. It's being done in a manner that makes sense. First were the people in critical infrastructure areas such as power plants, water supply, and other services needed to be in operating order before everybody else came to. Then the police stations were targeted, then the fire stations. Now adults of every kind are being randomly aroused.
That one is also sexual.
But that's not the only exciting revelation that he has for the president. The astronomers say 600 years have passed. President Stinson was astonished. The staffers were amused to see her reaction. Did you say 600 years? Yes, ma'am. It's a long time. The astronomers say today is June 18th, and they're studying the position of the stars, and apparently, yeah, it's confirmed it's been 600 years. It's unknown if Theresa managed to get the Hals under control, but the known hosts that were talked to, apparently they can't find their Hals or access their powers. So it looks like whatever she did worked. But of course, in all the time of everyone being unconscious, Theresa has been quite busy. There are countless new medical devices to do things we never dreamed of. We have thousands of new drugs to treat every disease and specifications for how to manufacture them. The South Pole has been eliminated except for a few small islands. Greenland has been cut up in many pieces and moved south. The ice is gone, and nothing can ever change ocean levels. None of this is explained how it works anyway, but whatever. The salt content of seawater has been reduced by half. It multiplies marine life and keeps bacteria under control. There's a new building near the Beltway. It's a library filled with millions of scientific books and articles on every subject. And when asked who wrote all these books, a large number of fantastically intelligent beings. The authors had numbers instead of names. Why numbers? We figure it makes it easier to look up who did what. Names can be confusing when they're similar. Numbers are unique. It simplifies the paper trail. But there's one final piece of information. Yes, you're all wondering it. And the president realizes it herself. Veronica Stinson's face saddened. Her mood spread to all. They knew what she was thinking. Theresa died hundreds of years ago! I may not have read that the way Norman intended. So the Earth is finally safe. Another 10 days later, everyone else on the planet's woken up. And because it's Empress Theresa, the president has to give a big heartfelt speech about how awesome Theresa was. Peter Blair told me something about Theresa. Theresa was never that popular with many people. She wasn't cool, hip, or totally awesome. Do I date myself? What people don't understand is the cool, hip, totally awesome don't save millions of lives and change the world. Theresa meant many things: order, kindness, intelligence, humility, faith,
Wind, water, heart.
hope, and common sense. She was the exemplar of all virtues. Here's your homework, guys. Go down to the comments section and find one of those virtues and how Theresa violated it. The multitude of answers would be deafening. But there is darkness on the horizon. Something was detected coming up from the remnants of the South Pole. Planes were sent out to investigate. Telescopes showed it was a silvery metallic object in the shape of a modern coffin. It was not designed to calm the nerves. And it goes on and on and on. Eventually, it lands in the middle of the mall in Washington, D.C. And this is after 2.5 pages of trying to build up the suspense. If you're gonna pull off a big twist like this, either make it interesting or just hurry it up. Don't linger, because this is boring. And oh god, the nightmare's back.
Oh shit, here we go again.
Of course she is. You knew that Norman wasn't going to let Theresa stay dead. She's been alive for 600 years because, shut up. And she's not alone. Steve and I walked out with a crowd of what looked like 10-year-old children. The crowd roared in delight. The line of 10-year-olds coming out the doors behind us was endless. There were 100 of them in sight, and still they were coming out. These kids might be the creepiest thing that Theresa ever came up with. And yes, she gave birth to every single one of them. All 420.
Smoke weed every day.
Oh my god, it's gotta be like an inner tube down there. Yeah, the textbooks from the library near the Beltway, the kids were the ones who wrote all of those. They're like these weird, creepy Children of the Corn genius people. I can't set up context for this, just listen. I smiled proudly. Steve maintained his cool, as did the children, who looked out casually at the crowd. They didn't act like 10-year-olds, but neither were they adults. I'd kept them in a pre-puberty state so they wouldn't fool around with each other. When you're writing a book, there are some scenarios and questions that come to mind that you are allowed to ignore. 200 children were visible. They wore multicolored armbands on their left arms. Red, green, blue, yellow, purple, and black stripes of various widths and arrangements signaled in which areas the children were most expert. The boys looked like Steve, and the girls like me. They all had my nearly black and very dark brown hair. And keep in mind, the kids don't actually have names. They're all identified by number. You're basically witnessing an army of child geniuses that popped out of a cloning factory run by narcissistic Bible thumpers. So, despite Hal not being able to absorb the other Hal before, now he can. Because fuck you. We figured out the physics of the Hals. Theresa's Hal has absorbed all the other Hals and will absorb any other Hal that comes in from space. When Theresa dies, Hal will merge with the Earth and never do anything again. Well, yeah, until the year 5.5/Apple/26, when the Earth is engulfed by the sun. So my question is, I can accept Theresa being able to survive all this time because of Hal and doing some magic bullshit, fine. How did Steve survive? How are the kids this smart? Because they're all supposed to be older than Methuselah, and they all have the equivalent of 100 college degrees. How are they alive? There's got to be some kind of atomic manipulation. These questions will be put into the go fuck yourself bin. This is what I was talking about with the foreshadowing earlier. Theresa studying biology and atomic theory. And just so we're clear, to confirm, she's out of the wheelchair now because we walked up the steps of the hastily assembled temporary wooden platform. I guess they've turned on their aging again, so they'll die eventually, but why? I mean, why not live on? They've done it for 600 years now. And did it really take 600 years to study the physics of Hal when Theresa was able to get a complete biological study done in her head in a matter of hours in a hotel room? Now that we're back, we will age like everybody else. Steve and I don't want to outlive our children. We will age too. We've been saying goodbye to them for years. With all the things they'll be doing, there won't be enough time for quality time in the little time. Stop saying time! We give our children to the world. Take good care of them. Farewell and be kind to each other. The people moved in to meet the children. Steve and I were smiling. Our work was done. And so am I. That's the last sentence. That was painful. When I was reading that, I was struggling to get through the last few pages. Just look at the notes that I've left here. All of that, these little speed bumps that kept stopping me from finishing the book and throwing this thing to the ground. It was like, I felt like I was drowning, and the surface of the water was right fucking there, just out of reach, and I kept struggling to get up there. Ugh. It was honestly kind of maddening. The last couple of pages, I admit I rushed through them, but this was an astonishing chore for me to get through, and I barely touched my notes during this 5th part of the review. I barely touched my notes through the majority of the review. A lot of them admittedly were like small things that I don't really need to expand on, like the multitude of typos. There were so many things wrong with every aspect of this book. I'm at a loss for words to try to explain how badly structured this book is. I don't think I can really explain it in a quantitative way. If Twilight is cancer, then this is fucking Chernobyl. The sheer amount of inconsistencies within the book are something that I think you could actually write a textbook on. There were so many times, especially as I got to the end of the book, there were so many times where I had to refer to something earlier in the book because it didn't sound right or it didn't mesh with how I remembered something being, and quite often that was the case. The scene where Theresa and Steve go skiing on that Lake Michigan mountain, they're both bundled up in really warm clothing, but why would Theresa need that when she puts off a lot of heat? It's like an extra 40 degrees around her. Did that go away? The majority of the characters are one-dimensional cheerleaders for Theresa. Prime Minister Blair, Prime Minister Ben, President Stinson, a number of other world leaders exist just to say, oh, what will Theresa Chan do next? Isn't she so great? The reporters that were constantly treated as antagonists, who were constantly going after Theresa for no reason that I could find, were eventually cheering for her near the end. Like every once in a while they would just start, oh, Theresa is awesome, go her, hooray. Like when she was promoted to the 5-star general rank, when that was just given to her. It is absolutely no lead up to any kind of an about face for them. It's just all of a sudden, they love her. None of the antagonists presented any kind of a reasonable threat to Theresa. No one could actually present any kind of physical, economic, emotional danger that meant anything. That was something that I figured out when I wrote Microgod, because the main character, Richard Clark, had the ability to control anything within him. He could literally turn somebody into mincemeat if they got too close to him. He was never in any kind of physical danger. The danger, the conflict, was in protecting others. That was the risk. Theresa, with her similar difficulty setting, never got close to any kind of conflict. So everything that she came across had these slipshod, boring answers that never amounted to anything. And because they were never really threats, they were never creative. Norman didn't even come up with some sort of a fun solution like, hey guys, Here's how we deal with North Korea. We'll just take all their leaders and launch them into the sun. Steve was perhaps the worst character in this entire book because he was just as narcissistic as Theresa was, but every once in a while when things were getting difficult, he would say, oh, let's just give up, and he would stop whatever they're trying to do. At one point, when Theresa's discussing plans for how to take care of North Korea, she reveals that it'll take a couple of months to properly enact any kind of a plan, and Steve says, oh, well, that'll take too long. Let's just give up. He's unsupportive, he's selfish, he's lazy, he is as bad as Theresa, but without any of the good girl points that she gets for being moral. Theresa, though, oh god, I don't even know where to start on her. Theresa is everything wrong with the concept of fiction. She is the height of Mary Sue. She's going to be my go-to Mary Sue example from now on instead of Bella Swan. She's never challenged. The plot... There are many ways to define a Mary Sue. I like the one that Overly Sarcastic Productions came out with.
The story still only exists to serve the image of the character, just like it did the Gen 1 Sue. No matter the skin, the Mary Sue makes the story boring around them. A story with a Sue at its core is written as though the Sue is the center of the universe. We're supposed to accept at face value that they're the most interesting, most important character in the story, because that's the starting point of their character. Not their backstory, not their motivation, just how invested we're supposed to be.
Everything that happens in this book, without exception, exists to make Theresa look good. Every conflict, every tangent, every problem, every display of power exists to make Theresa, the super good girl, look better. It's not to teach any lessons, it's not to explore any themes, it's not to give any message, it's to make Theresa look good. That is the purpose of this book. That is Empress Theresa at its core. Theresa is good. That's it. I have summed up the entire book in 3 words. I saw someone at one point post that Empress Theresa is a lot easier to get through if you look at it as more of an unintentional parody and you don't take it seriously. I was trying to approach it critically, so I didn't have that option. But I think that that is perhaps the easiest way to survive it. If you approach it the same way you would The Room, knowing that it is supposed to be hilariously awful, then that will make it a lot easier. Also, if you're not taking an amazing number of notes for an analytical video, so that's also a challenge, but that's my little challenge to anyone who wants to suffer any kind of an endurance test. If you think you can, go ahead and try to finish this book. It's amazing to actually experience. I mean, it's not good. It's fucking awful. It is incompetent in every degree of the word. I don't think I can ever find a book that will top Empress Theresa. Now, normally at the end, I'll go through my notes to wrap up anything that I missed or point out a few other small details. I've got 120 pages of this. I'm not doing that right now. So those notes might have to wait for another part. I might do a part 6 just to wrap up all these extra notes if you guys are interested enough. I was also thinking of talking to my father, you know, the actual fucking physicist, and getting his reactions on some of the scientific bullshit of this book, because that'll be funny. If that's something you guys want to see, let me know. There are a lot more awful books for me to go over, and none of them can top Empress Theresa in terms of sheer badness. But that doesn't mean that I'm not going to try. So, if you're watching this within the first 3 days of this going live, go check out my Twitter, where you will find a poll on what I should review next. You'll have to forgive me if I take a while to get to the next review, though, because I am way behind schedule on a number of Book Was Better projects that I want to get to, and I need a break, and I need to go restock on tabs. But thank you all for joining me on what has certainly been the most insane book that I have ever read. I did not think this was going to become a multi-parter. This whole series is like 6 or 7 hours long, and somehow a lot of you have stuck through it, so that's awesome. Thank you for that. I hope you're all doing well. I hope quarantine isn't driving you mad, and I hope this at least staved off some of the boredom. Anyway, I have much better writing projects to dawdle around with, namely my own, and I want to get that novel out sometime later this year, so wish me luck on that. Parfenum goes blah.